Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of Talking Germany, the show where we do just that. And today I'm joined by one of the outstanding filmmakers here in Germany in the last 2 decades or so. And here he is, Oskar Roehler. Thank you very much for joining us today on Talking Germany.
Nice to meet you.
Great to have you here. Now, what makes Oskar Roehler so very compelling is that in his films and his autobiographical novel, which was published last year, which he's also turning into a movie, he has addressed and continues to address some of the most painful issues that have dogged German society in the last half a century or so. So I'm sure it's going to be fascinating talking to Oskar Roehler today, both about his work and his very special and intense relationship with Germany and German history. So, first question, Oskar Roehler, why do you make movies?
It was a compromise in the first time, if I'm honest, because I always wanted to write this novel which I have written. And that's really true. I had to do a lot of experiences which were for me more easy. Maybe it has to do because both of my parents were writers. Mm-hmm. And if you're the son of 2 writers, maybe you have more problems to write yourself or to bring yourself into the position that you think I can write too. Mm-hmm. Because you have this huge, in a childhood, they always tell you, wow, your father and your mother, they are both writers. They live in these big cities and they're so intelligent.
They cast big shadows.
Exactly.
Okay. We'll talk about your parents in a little bit. We'll talk about your autobiographical novel in a little bit too. Just for people who maybe haven't seen any of your films, in our international... I mean, your films have been internationally successful, but let's just assume somebody out there who hasn't seen your films, what kind of films do you make?
I make something which is in Germany is quite rare. I tend to do drama and black comedy. I mix it somehow together. It's like I make drama and I make a tragic comedy.
So tragic comedy.
Tragic comedy, yeah.
That's interesting. One German magazine said Oskar Roehler has taken the catastrophe of his childhood and made it the material for his films. Is that a fair comment?
I think that's, for many artists, the reasonable way to manage his life.
A kind of therapy?
I think it was. It used to be a therapy in my younger days when I took things more serious, and now it's more. Maybe I've learned a little more wisdom. To take it not so serious anymore. But the stories are the same. Mm-hmm. They didn't really change a lot.
You mentioned that you did a lot of things before you got into movie making. You took the easy route. I mean, effectively, you were down and out before you got into movie making. Is that fair?
Down and out means?
You were down and out. You were living a sort of a low life kind of existence.
Yeah, you can. I think the whole West Berlin in the 80s was a kind of a subcultural, underground, little eccentric idea of to make a living. It didn't really. You didn't take an effort to get into society somehow. Mm-hmm. You tried to manage it on the extreme outsider position. Yeah.
And how did you get from there to being in movies? Because in Germany, traditionally, most people who make movies in Germany, they go through the traditional structures, through the movie schools.
Right.
Yeah.
I make a heritage from my grandmother. About
very useful.
I did my first movie with the heritage of my grandmother, actually, which was, I think, in these days, 15,000 euros, something like this.
A tidy little sum, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I had to do my first movie.
Okay. We'll find out more shortly. You've had your first impressions there from Oskar Roehler. Let's take a closer look now at his life and his work.
Oskar Roehler is a well-known figure in Germany's film scene. His material often refers to his own personal story, offering glimpses into a traumatic childhood. Roehler originally got into cinema as a screenwriter, and he was 36 when he made his directorial debut. Last year saw the publication of his first novel, Herkunft, meaning origins. It's a literary reckoning with his parents and their parents, a family panorama spanning 3 generations. Oskar Roehler's parents, Gisela Elsner and Klaus Roehler, were prominent in West Germany's post-war literary scene. His mother was a promising young writer with a reputation for eccentricity and opposition to bourgeois life. His father was an editor for pivotal writers like Günter Grass. One set of grandparents produced garden gnomes, while the other grandfather headed a Siemens industrial plant. In his 2009 drama Lulu and Jimmy, Roehler portrays his maternal grandmother as an ambitious, nouveau riche mother driven by the goal of selling her daughter to the highest bidder.
What have you 2 lovebirds got planned for this evening?
I've got tickets for a drive-in movie.
Oh, you rascal, you.
Hallo, Ernst.
Gisela Elsner was 21 when she married Klaus Roehler. Both were actively involved in the Progressive Writers Association, Gruppe 47. Their son, Oskar, was born in 1959, but putting her own literary ambitions above motherhood, Gisela left the family 3 years later. Oskar grew up being shuffled back and forth between his grandparents and his father. In his novel, the mother character is portrayed as cold-hearted and self-centered. She sat there like Cleopatra on the throne. You listened even though the text was insistent and barely tolerable, because she stuck her finger in various wounds and enjoyed it. Oskar Roehler's first feature film, 12 years ago, also focused on his mother. It gave him his breakthrough.
But what would I do there? I don't stand a chance.
Oskar Roehler has never shied away from tackling his troubled childhood. His films reflect a sense of uncertainty, at times tragic, at times farcical, including a take on hippie mothers and their journey towards personal fulfillment.
That's Bruno, your half-brother. It's high time I introduced you. Come on. I'd have brought you together a lot earlier, but it was complicated.
Roehler's novel is a psychological profile of his childhood that yet transcends his own personal story. The book is also a distillation of life in post-war West Germany. Like many artists before him, Oskar Roehler overcame hardship in his own life and transformed it. He now lives with his second wife, a successful fashion designer in Berlin. And today he's our guest on Talking Germany, Oskar Roehler.
Let's just talk first of all about the movie you've been making about your autobiographical novel, Origins of Life. How far have you got with that project?
It's finished now.
It's actually fully completed, yeah?
Exactly. It comes out in February next year. It's almost 3 hours long.
3 hours long?
Yeah. It's a family story.
It's an epic.
It's an epic. It's an epic.
3 generations.
3 generations.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the novel is a totally different thing to adapt a novel which you have written by your own than to write a screenplay about the same thing.
Why?
Because the novel is so much more rich of ideas and thoughts and everything that you can put out a lot more, and it's not so voraussehbar. It's not so
predictable.
It's not so predictable, but because in the novel you go different ways. You follow the figures in a different way. If a figure gets important, the whole thing gets important. In a screenplay, you have to stop it. You have to say no. This is not the important figure. You cannot go with her so much. So you go in the classical, conventional way, and here you can go quite far in a certain direction, and it's very spannend. That's very.
It's very exciting.
Exciting.
Yeah, it's got a sort of a thriller element, and a psychological thriller almost.
Exactly. Because you ask yourself, oh, where's he going? Where's he going? Where's this going to? But it's interesting. You know, it's not boring. So, I made the experience, it's not a problem to do 3 hours, to look or to watch 3 hours of a movie, which is not so predictable.
If it's as good as you're making it, Oskar, then I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. Yeah. That's something for me to look forward to in the future. Let's go back in time a little bit. Where the three generations we're talking about are you, your parents, your grandparents. And let's talk about your parents. I'm particularly interested in, we heard in that report about this legendary Group 47, yeah? That your parents, the literary group that your parents were members of. Take us back to that time. Tell us why that group was so legendary.
It was the first literary group which came together in this time. You have to see the country as a... I know they came there from all parts of the country without any money. It was this time in the beginning of the 50s where you have to walk, and when it's cold you don't have warm things, and you have to do all this stuff. So it was a group of really eine versprengte Gruppe, a group of. So it was a very interesting mix, because you have all these like older writers which had this another capacity to think of them, and they have dark sides, and they come from another generation, and you have these young people in the 50s which are this kind of James Dean generation, but in Germany they were very much infected by the idea of changing things very much. Yeah. They have to do new stuff. Yeah. So there was a lot of experiments going on the one hand, and on the other hand you have these old guys which have written the conventional structures. So it was a lot of fight and discussion and conflict, and but they hold it together. Yeah. Normally it would go like.
It's fascinating hearing you talking about this, because when you're speaking about it, you sound as though the figures that you've bought into the fact that these figures were actually quite heroic. They were actually changing society. They were creating a new Germany. This is the time of 1968. The student revolt here in Germany and all that kind of stuff. You've been very critical of that in the past. What does 1968 mean to you?
No, I think the time where I was talking about was earlier. I think the creation of all these new ideas were more individual than they were like 10 years later. 10 years later, when you had these 86 people, you have
68, 1968.
68. You have the problem with this in Germany much more than you had it, for example, in Britain or in America, where they tried to enjoy this time more, even if there was crime and Charles Manson, whatever was going on. It was a short time of really
a dark side.
Yeah, but it was a great thing. It was a glamorous, great.
And in Germany?
And in Germany, everything you start to do, it's with the Film Academy in a way the same. You get into this kind of like bureaucratic machinery. They stop thinking individually. They stop thinking enjoying their life. There comes a lot of stuff together which you find in other times in another context in the same way again. This kind of fanatism, this kind of humorless thing, this hatred against special other groups. And it's very small thinking, I think, and it's quite... But the heroic people, they were older. Like they are still... today existing, like Hans Magnus Enzensberger or so.
The writer.
They are still there on the top of the mountains, you know, and the other, they disappeared. And I don't know with what it has to do. I think it's long before the Nazi time. We always have this problem of being too serious about things and so losing the fun somehow. And this was what the 68 people had. They lost their fun very, very quickly. And they made a big affair out of it, like Baader-Meinhof and so on. Today it's chic to be to think about these people, but they were fanatics.
Okay. One film that many people here in Germany immediately think of when they hear the name Oskar Roehler. It came out back in the year 2000. It certainly left a big impression on me, and it's called No Place to Go. We've got this report.
While others celebrate the fall of the Berlin Wall, it's a personal disaster for Hannah Flanders. She's a West German writer committed to the communist regime about to collapse in the East. Her spontaneous move from Munich to Berlin goes horribly wrong. The reunion with her son after 3 years is awkward.
Hello, Anna.
Hi, Mum.
How are you?
How long are you staying?
Long.
What does that mean?
I'm moving here for the time being.
Really? That's great.
Hannah had been published in the East, where her publisher is now embarrassed to see her. Her career has collapsed, just like the communist system.
Well, I mean, what are you doing here?
Unable to cope, Hannah returns to Munich. She's an extreme smoker addicted to pills. A final chance meeting with her ex-husband ends in despair.
Ich muss jetzt gehen, obwohl ich nicht weiß, wohin.
After breaking down in Munich, Hannah kills herself in a clinic, just as Roehler's mother, Gisela Elsner, did in real life. The story of a woman who is her own downfall.
It's a fascinating film. The central figure, Hannah, is effectively a portrayal of your mother. Just one second. Was she a typical... Was your mother, was the Hannah in the film a typical figure from her generation that you've just been describing? Somebody who was fanatical and humourless?
No, not really, because I think she was somehow outstanding. She was very eccentric. Normally, you don't have this in Germany. She was very eccentric. She lived in London for 8 years, for example. She hated Germany. She had to come back because of money problems. So, she could never arrange with the things here. She did the same thing she did before. She put on clothes so that everybody on the streets will look at her.
And even without those, she was a remarkable-looking woman. She was a very unusual-looking person.
Yeah, she was.
I've been studying photos of her this past week, and she's a very unique-looking person.
Right, she was. I think she was very. I read her. She started to write when she was very young, like with 13, 14, 15. She wrote very bizarre stories about people. She had a kind of humor which was absurd, the absurd theater and this kind of stuff. This was what she was following somehow.
The German version of the movie is called Die Unberührbare, the Untouchable. Why did you call her the Untouchable?
Maybe because she was like a chameleon. You always think she is open-minded and she can let people near her, but in a certain time when she was older, she was hurt too much. So she was verbittered and...
she was bitter.
Yeah, she... Unberührbar for me, it was always this. I visit her once a year. She comes to the door. We made a kiss without touching us. And then she sat on the sofa and she lost herself in hours and hours monologues. So by drinking and whatever, and there was kind of like a wall of words which were always pushed to you. I know this from other people. It's not so. People do it. Some people do it.
What do you think she would have said about your movie? Because she didn't live to see it.
I think she wouldn't understand it, and she wouldn't think it's her. And this has two reasons. I think the film is great, not because I did a good portrait of her. If I did a cool portrait of her, as I know it now, she would be a much smaller person. She's a much bigger person in the movie because it's a naive person. Yeah. So and you can follow her with your empathy. With the real person, how I know her, or I described her in the novel, with all her tricks and infame stories.
Yeah.
You wouldn't like to really. She's a heroic loser in the movie, but in the real life, she sometimes was a criminal somehow.
Do you miss her?
No. I know.
She's your mother.
Yeah, but the connection was cut off.
Something different might have happened.
If
there could have been a whole new phase in your lives together if she'd lived longer.
I don't see it. I don't see it. Maybe this is the point, but I understand her. Let's say.
You said something. She took her own life. She must have been in a desperate state to take her own life. And there's a quote from you. You said, "When I heard that she'd taken her own life, I was in the middle of making a movie. I started to cry. I was totally liberated."
Yeah, I cannot explain this situation really good, but it happened. It was just the curse or the spell, the bad spell was gone somehow. I don't know how to. She got a lot of dark power by her own mother. Her mother treated her really bad in a quite similar way as my mother treated me somehow, and so it was. And it was the contrary. My mother treated me. She neglected me. My grandmother put all her power on her daughter, but it was in a way it was the same thing. It was an anti-reaction somehow. She had no interest in human life. That's what she said. She doesn't like creature. She doesn't like children. She hated her. That's what she said in her late days. You know.
Are you good with children?
I'm good with children. I'm a little anxious and I'm a little afraid because I don't know them, but I like them. And I shot with a small guy, and we went to be really good friends. We were kind of very close during the movie.
Great.
So he was 6 years old. He was really a fantastic guy, but he's not my son. So. Yeah. So, but I have, yeah, sure. I mean, I like children, sure.
Great stuff. Well, it's a long, vividly told and very German story. It is Oskar Roehler's novel, Herkunft, or Origin in English. And if you'd like to have a go at winning a signed German-language copy of the book, all you have to do is to write into us, including your comments on the show. So either send a letter to DW, Talking Germany team at Wolterstrasse 6 in 13355 Berlin, Germany. Just as good, of course, send an email to talkinggermany@dwde. And just one thing to bear in mind, please get your mail to us within 14 days if you can. Now, a change of subject, a change of mood indeed. We're going to talk about people who have a very special role in life and people who had a very special role in Oskar Roehler's life. They are what are called here in Germany Großeltern, quite simply grandparents. We have this report.
Klaus Schwednas and his grandchildren. He's with them almost every day. Schwednas' daughter is a single parent and he supports her as best he can. Today he's in the garden with her kids. Schwednas is a 60-year-old retiree. It's a new experience spending the entire day with children.
I didn't have much time with my own kids. I'd leave early for work and come home in the evening, then I'd check their homework. But with these two kids, I can say that we're enjoying ourselves. They're happy when I say, let's go to the park, or the swimming pool, or today we're taking a tour with the tram.
About 2/3 of German grandparents help look after their grandchildren. They provide millions of hours of child-minding. Sabine Heuer says they do that very willingly. Hoyer is a psychologist at the University of Göttingen. In interviews with grandchildren, she has found they also value their connection to their grandparents. It's a very special relationship.
Grandparents perform an important role in shaping their grandchildren's characters by loving them. They're emotionally very close to them, and it's a very unconditional form of love. They don't expect anything in return. It's total devotion. It's a happy relationship because no parenting role is being required of the grandparents.
It's also a relationship built to last. Petra is 34 years old and a mother. She's still very close to her grandmother, Ketty, and she has fond memories of the time when she herself used to sit on her grandmother's lap.
I was always allowed to watch an awful lot more television at my grandmother's. Children love that. I didn't have to clean up after myself. At home, we had to clean up, but not here.
I think that's what being a grandmother is all about, indulging the kids or the grandkids.
Ferdinand loves gardening with his granddad, who has plenty of time to explain things to him. It's a role familiar to grandparents everywhere, but much has changed over the years.
What's changed is that grandparents today are much more active, alert, and more a part of society. They can understand a lot of their grandchildren's concerns. 30 or 40 years ago, grandchildren and grandparents lived two very different realities.
Ketty Freidel became a grandmother at 44. Her grandchildren are coming a little later today. On average, Germans become grandparents at age 50. But no matter the age, they still perform the same duties grandparents have always done.
Lots of grandchildren say that by being with their grandparents, they get their first sense of time passing by. They learn that in the past, things were different.
For grandparents, on the other hand, grandchildren are a fountain of youth. An elderly person with a grandchild is healthier and stays that way longer.
Oskar Roehler, grandparents. What does the word mean to you?
Grandparents are great parents for me.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I had my really good experiences with them.
You lived with both sets of grandparents.
Exactly. Yeah.
How did that work exactly? I'm not sure. Yeah.
No, I had to. I was with the parents of my father first, and I lived there for 2.5 years, and then my father made the big mistake to take me to Berlin, where he didn't take care of me, and after that I went to the other grandparents. Both were kind of like guardian angels somehow. The grandparents of my father found me on the beach in North Italy while my father had an affair with somebody he met on the street. So I was just...
Oh, lordy.
Yeah, geez, they wanted to visit and they saw me on the beach, you know. And
so they rescued you?
Yeah, my grandmother said, hey, this is Oskar. I mean, this must be... this is my... And then they took me home and I stayed there for 3 years. And then and it was really fantastic for a child because it was... everything you want and need, you know. And they were people who found their inner freedom and their inner space, and you could teach a lot and can give a lot of love to and show a lot of the world to me.
And then later you lived with your grandparents on the other side as well?
I lived with the other grandparents, and they did the same thing. I was kind of like alone in this Berlin flat all the time.
You were a teenager by this time?
No, I was 3.5 when I went to the first, and I was 6.5 when my father came and put me to Berlin.
Oh, yeah?
And then I had 2 really awful years in Berlin, and suddenly the driver of my grandfather stand in the front. It rings. The driver of my grandfather stands in the front door.
The grandfather had a driver.
He had a driver. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And he had a uniform. He was like in a fairy tale.
And you can remember this. You can remember.
Yeah, sure.
He came to the door. He knocked at the door.
Exactly.
And took you away.
And he said, "Do you like to come to the Kempinski? Your grandfather's, your grandparents
one
are
of the most
there."
luxurious hotels in Berlin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I said, "Okay, no problem."
You packed your bag and you were off to the Kempinski.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And during this evening, they found out that things went really wrong. And my grandmother went to the next day. He went to my father and said, "Oskar doesn't want to stay. He is in the hotel. We take him to Nuremberg now, and I think it's the best for the boy. And I hope you won't say anything, but because otherwise you will hear from my lawyer."
Okay, but it's interesting. The detail about the chauffeur and about the luxury hotel is interesting because these grandparents they were very well off, yeah. And this was sort of the middle of the post-war period in Germany. This was materialistic West Germany.
Exactly.
And it went wrong.
Yeah, but it didn't went wrong with me, and it didn't really there was a dark story in the past of the family, which has to do with the marriage of my grandparents. So the inner circle in the house was kind of not working anymore. Mm-hmm. The husbands were not working together anymore. Mm-hmm. But I got friend to my grandmother for many years. Mm-hmm. Very, very, maybe one of the deepest connections I had. Mm-hmm. Because she was a brilliant person. She was just in the wrong place, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because I'm one of the few people, like in my generation, who doesn't know only like the very small bourgeois upcoming, mm-hmm. because I was kind of like changing the sides in many ways, so I know a little. So you had these left-leaning parents, but you also knew the grandparents who were part of the real bourgeois setup that was the old Germany. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. I mean, they were not like really old bourgeois family. They were, and this was maybe the problem with them, they were kind of like very upcoming. They were new money. They were more or less not only new money. My grandfather was a physicist mm-hmm. who developed huge stuff. So he was kind of accomplished. He was successful. Yeah. Okay, we're going to continue to talk about your grandparents. We're going to take an indirect route to get there because we're going to talk now about men with beards and pointy hats, otherwise known as garden gnomes. Yes, garden gnomes. Oskar is laughing. They've played a central role in the iconography, I suppose it's fair to say, of Oskar Roehler's life.
This is Michael, a friendly neighborhood gnome made in the town of Grevenrode. They've been making the quirky little fellows here since the late 19th century. Michael has a minor role in Oskar Roehler's new film, The Sources of Life. The grandfather of the main character is a successful producer of garden gnomes in post-war West Germany. The filmmakers approached the Griebel company in Grevenrode because they still had the old gnome casts. And speaking of casting, Michael was picked because he's from the 1950s, which is when the film is set.
These gnomes are from the 1950s and made of terracotta. Of course, Michael ends up getting broken in the film. That's why he had to be made of terracotta.
This semi-autobiographical film by Oskar Roehler is based on his own debut novel from last year. The grandfather character, the former Nazi who now makes gnomes, is likewise based on his own mother's father.
I always said 27.35% is from my own life and the rest is fictional. It could be 44.6%, it's difficult to say. Of course, I use characters who existed back then and my memories, but I do some serious reshaping of the characters.
The new film, The Sources of Life, features a cast of hundreds of gnomes, especially made for the production. There are some 25 million gnomes in gardens across Germany. And Reinhard Griebel's diminutive beings are known all over the world, even apart from their appearance on the big screen.
So your grandfather was a gnome manufacturer.
Right, yes, you can say that in this way.
So what do gnomes mean to you?
They mean it smelled very good. I saw, when I visited my grandfather, there were like 25 to 30 women, which he casted from small villages, mostly old women. And they were kind of like painting in a very quiet situation, very contemplative, and it smelled good. And in the end, they were kind of like die glänzten sehr. It was very.
So they were very shiny, very glossy.
Very shiny, and they had he changed it from year to year with the fashion. You know what is modern right now. In the end, they were really disgusting ones. You know, kind of like really disgusting stuff, and. They mean to me
kitschy.
childhood.
You mean very kitschy?
Yes, some. No, they were really perverse. You know, not my grandfather did that, but there was an industry of kind of like.
I don't know if I want to know.
Yeah, you better you don't ask. Yeah.
Tell me about your grandfather.
They mean to me childhood.
They mean to you childhood?
They mean childhood to me, exactly.
This was a very, very, very happy phase of your childhood. It was idyllic.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly. As a child, you don't look behind the idyll.
And what was behind the idyll?
They are nothing. Yeah, this Nazis shit of my grandfather was gone like from 15 years or something. He was in the SPD Ortsverein. My uncle put him and said, so SPD...
You mean after the war? He had become a social democrat?
Exactly. Yeah.
But he had been a Nazi?
He had been an active Nazi, yeah. In the... he was actually... he grew up in Thüringen, which was very, very...
Eastern German state, yeah?
Yeah, it was very Nazi-infected in this time. You had just and he toured around holding speeches on the marketplaces of the villages.
As a young man?
As a very young man, as a young man.
And he never, as I understand it, he never fully broke with what that had meant to him.
Nobody knows. He never told somebody about this time or glorifies it in no way. He never told anybody about it. So he was, I think it was gone for him. It was in some part of his mind, but he wouldn't blessing other people with it somehow, you know. He doesn't want to...
So he didn't thrust it onto other people. I mean, what you're saying, in effect, is we're talking about your grandfather, who you loved, who you adored, and you're saying that he was, as a young man, he got up to very, very, very bad business indeed, possibly sort of criminal activities almost, yeah? As an older man, he was a lovely... old guy.
I don't think it was such kind of a cliché, because I was told later, I don't know if it was right, that he tried to help people in the time. And I think actually he was, if it's historically, because it's interesting, in the Nazi time there was it was called the Strasserflügel. Strasser was killed by Hitler like some years later, and he was in this Strasserflügel. So
this was a wing of the Nazi Party, and the Strasser was an ideologue in southeastern Germany, down in Franconia.
Strasser was a social guy. He wants to reform the social plans.
They say. Before we get into the thick of talking about sort of the strands of Nazism, just let me tell you, it strikes me that one of the big ironies of your life is that in many ways, you hated the people who were associated with 1968. And ironically, you loved somebody who had been a Nazi when he was younger. That's a huge irony in the context of German history.
Yeah, but you know, in German history or in nowadays, it's always the same thing, you know. The people neglect the truth somehow. And with the truth, I mean their inner truth. There's a verdict to say anything good about any context of the Nazi time, which I think is okay. I think you should be aware of that is good. But on the other hand, you have a lot of private situations, you know, you grow up in a special way. And as a child, when you can't bring your own life together, you are obliged on people who take responsibility for you. And the only people who really took responsibility for you were my grandparents. How can I love my parents only because they are socialists and whatever, have long beards and long hair? That's no reason to love somebody, you know. I love somebody for teaching me things and take care of me and giving me love and giving me a family life and giving me security. That's why I love somebody. And yeah, I mean, that's the truth. I mean, on the other hand, my grandfather, and that's what I have to verify, my grandfather was not telling anything good about Nazi time. Ever.
Oskar Roehler, we're going to have to leave it there. You love people who love you. I think that's the truth from Oskar Roehler. He's been a great guest, the frank and thoughtful Oskar Roehler, the filmmaker. If you want to find out still more, check out my blog on the Talking Germany website. And if you've enjoyed the show as much as I have, come back next week. Until then, bye-bye and tschüss.